It is they were still not live. Let's check this out here. I think we should be going. All right, well, hopefully we are running, bringing it to you live from Fairfax, Virginia. Pretty exciting morning. One thing is, it looks like there's a lot of lag during the ranked game, so I think we'll try to get in them anyway, but, a little bit hesitant. And first, we are going to do a little bit discussion of the meta, where it has been, where it is going, and kind of an in-depth look at CLG. Amongst other pro teams, I suppose. But we are going to kind of start it off there. Of course, we had the GG Classic this last weekend. A lot of interesting stuff going on. Certainly a lot of interesting stuff. A couple things that I want to make note of. Items that are going to get nerfed. Trellia's Reverie, Quicksilver Sash probably. It's kind of weird because Quicksilver Sash has been buffed repeatedly over time. It was an item that no one used to ever get, unless they were perhaps going against like a Malzahar and a Warwick. But now it is pretty frequently bought. It is kind of a standard item to be built on AD carries. It is like frequently their one and only defensive item. That cleanse is just ridiculously good. So I think we might see a little nerf to that at some point going forward here. Shrelia's Reverie. It is a pretty crazy item. It is almost standard on pro teams to have one on both the support and the jungler. We saw that a ton all throughout the GG Classic and just, throughout a lot of other tournaments too. In fact, we saw CLG run support, jungler, and they had Hotshot buying it top lane as well. So that is pretty crazy. Of course, there were times when he didn't use it appropriately or didn't use it at all during team fights, which is, of course, kind of a waste of the item because it doesn't give you that much besides that activation. It does give you good cooldown, a little bit of health, but you're spending a lot of money on health regeneration and mana regeneration that you don't need in the heat of battle, essentially. I think Freak mentioned in Hanover that they were going to nerf it, or just mentioned that it was very, very strong and nerf worthy. Of course, I don't know that he actually makes any of the balance calls, but certainly, if he sees it, a lot of other pro players see it. He probably talks to the balancing team, which is composed of Static and Classic, I think, and some other older players, as well, of course, as the Riot staff in general. So those are two items that I would be concerned might be nerfed. Kog'Maw would be the champion I would be most looking at to nerf. Janna's still strong, but Nunu Kog'Maw is a ridiculously strong lane, and we saw throughout the tournament people were just making sure that that combination didn't go forward. Saraga Kog'Maw really, really strong, just in part because Kog'Maw can really do enough damage without assistance from her support, without an additional, attack damage bonus from her support to really beat out a lot of the other AD carries. And going into late game, just hyper carries a lot better than almost everyone else. I don't really know what it is about Kog'Maw that allows him to do that. Of course, Bio Arcane Barrage is awesome, gives him a lot of range, gives him some, percentage health damage. But when you compare him to Tristana, looks like she has better steroids for that late game, does have that range consistently. That's pretty long. I think it's like around 710 or something like that. But she just doesn't seem to carry as hard for me, and it's weird because she does have, a better escape mechanism, or an escape mechanism where Kog'Maw doesn't, and a little bit better burst rather with her ultimate, and a little bit better attack damage steroids with rapid fire. All that being said, it just seems like Kog'Maw really is more of a dominant force, especially maybe he just transitions from middle game or early game to middle game a little bit better. And I think that's really where he shines, too. Once he hits 6, has that living artillery, really does a lot of damage to people. And we also saw him go AP middle a lot in the tournament, and that is just one of the most frustrating characters to go against. If you don't really punish him early, or even if you do really punish Kog'Maw early, he can still poke you down with great effectiveness, just shooting out that living artillery. And of course, at level 3, it has like a 1-second cooldown, 2200 range, and with a blue buff you can just spam it non-stop and just really punish people. We saw Big Fat LP playing on him against Fortnite Gaming. It was in a game that they won. They did eventually lose that series, but man, with 200 ping, both Big Fat LP and Hotshot GG were landing all of their skill shots. What we did see from that game, and they lost the series overall, in large part probably because of 200 ping, And probably being very tired. But we did see the poke composition come out. Caitlyn, who was the sport? I think it was. Well, it was Caitlyn, Malachi, as a jungler, of course. Kog'Maw as an AP carry. Top lane was AP Nidalee. I forget who the support was. I think it was Janna. Yes, it was Janna. So basically, it was a complete poke team lineup. You had Maokai throwing twisted saplings in. You had Caitlyn, with a lot of range, with a lot of escapability. I think both Caitlyn and Kog'Maw might have been running cleanse. They also built a lot of Shirley's Reveries. They also built a lot of Quicksilver sashes just so they wouldn't get caught. Whereas Fortnite Gaming had a really AoE-centric team. They had Morgana and a Mumu. And I forget who their top lane was. Oh, a Yorick top lane, which I think Yorick was kind of the downfall. Because despite the fact that they could win fights, they could never catch up to the opposing team. And despite one really neat play where Yorick teleported behind CLG to slow him down, they just couldn't catch up with all of those Shirley's Reveries with Janna's, great, you know, disengaging tools. Like if they would chase, she would Monsoon, she would use Howling Gale, she would, do basically everything you would need her to do, hit those Shirley Reveries, and the whole team was really on point, and they would run away, but they would keep also sending those pokes in. So despite the fact that Double Lift actually got caught a couple times as Caitlyn, there was never like a full-blown fight throughout the game. It was 40 minutes in, it was like 4-3 in kills or something ridiculous like that. But CLG just kept on pushing down inhibitors. It meant that Fortnite couldn't do anything. And despite the fact that uh, they had all their towers down. They did take a lot of early dragons. I don't know if they took a Baron, but CLG wasn't really worried about Baron. CLG's like, oh no, we're just gonna keep on pushing those inhibitors down, and then eventually they got a free Baron, and that was kind of like the end of the match. So, and they got that free Baron by virtue of all the inhibitors being down. So I guess one thing to learn is the poke meta is kind of back, and I think Riot will do something about that. I don't think Riot likes the poke meta, um, especially when in this case you can only really run the poke meta with a couple of people. AP Cog, my guess, is probably the best AP middle to do it with. Of course, we've also seen Gragas do it, and he has pretty good range with his barrels. Can really zone people out of the towers, and let your team just kind of like charge down middle. And I've been seeing that in solo queue too. We had an AP Cogman. He's just like, oh, we got an advantage. He actually killed an AP Soraka against the middle, which is kind of another unusual pick, but one that you see in high elo. Killed the AP Soraka middle, and it's like, okay, now they don't have sustain. I have my 2200 range. Let's just keep on pushing down. So it was a very even game. Like actually, I think I was playing bottom lane. We might have been a little bit behind at the time. I was playing Janna. But then we just started pushing down middle, and they couldn't do anything to stop us because that AP Kog'Maw did so much damage. And on the other hand, I was playing Lulu as a support against an AP Kog'Maw, and we were actually like dominating the game. But like we were winning. I think we got Baron once, and like we pushed down a lot of towers, but we couldn't get the inhibitor because they just kept on poking us out. And even with Baron buff, we didn't have enough regeneration to withstand that poke from AP Kog'Maw. So we had to back out, and then we were winning the game. And time came around for the next Baron 7 minutes later. And we couldn't take it because Kog'Maw would just keep on poking at us, and it came to a point where, oh man, we're all at half health. Now we actually have to flee Baron, and be afraid of giving up Baron, which I think actually happened. They got Baron, and then they started pushing us down. We're like, no. Um, Regardless, one thing I liked seeing from CLG was that they've kind of evolved from a team that was always like farm, 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 farm. Let's get into a team fight. Let's all press R and go for it. I mean, that has suited them very well for years because for one, I think they have the best team fighting team in the sense that Chowster really good as a support or an AD carry for that matter. Double Lift really good positioning, really good mechanical skills. Uh, Big Fat LP or Big Fat GG, probably the best positioning of any AP middle. It's just always so great. Lands really good ultimates almost all the time. Saint Vicious really good at interrupting the back lines and picking his spots. But I would say Hotshot's probably the weak link insofar as he sometimes gets out of position in team fights, whereas no one else really seems to at all, like ever. Like everyone else seems to be like a cohesive unit, and sometimes Hotshot gets caught, especially when he plays Swain. But Swain's like an interesting character wherein you have to go into the enemy team. regardless, actually we also saw that in this last tournament where he kind of charged a little bit too far in as Olaf was separated, was kind of taken down, and the rest of the fight was going way behind him, and he did separate the AD carry off. He was chasing down a Kog'Maw, for instance, as Olaf, but just he wasn't able to do it long enough and wasn't able to survive long enough to really make it worthwhile and to give up the protection to his back lines. So that is something, and I think that strategy of let's farm, we farm better than everyone else, then let's get into team fights, we team fight better than anyone else, has suited them well for a long time. But because of that lag, maybe they're like, oh well, let's go for a poke composition because we're just like not quite as spot on during the team fights, which 200 ping will do to you. So the poke composition worked despite the ping. And then the last game, they lost as well. But what we did see, last night, I believe, was the NESL, and they played 4 Gaming again and absolutely crushed them both games. And what really surprised me there is the fact that they went after Dragon. And CLG has long been known to be like, oh, we don't even care about Dragon. You take Dragon, we're going to keep farming. We think, that'll be better for us. We'll take down a turret, we'll keep farming. The gold advantage or gold difference will be minimal. But I think, they kind of learned their lesson, or I'm not sure if, this was a, conscious change in their strategy. But it seemed like, in the other games, in the GG Classic, 4 Gaming was really sticking in games and a little bit ahead at all times just because of those dragons. You look at the gold difference, and it would be mainly composed of, the 3 dragons that 4 got, either earlier in the game or at some point, that allowed them to also win those team fights, in part because 200 ping. And they were probably only so close also because the farm of CLG was probably inhibited by that ping. So I'm not sure if we're going to see that, going forward from CLG now. But we saw conscious efforts to go for Dragon, to pull Hotshot down to middle, to have 4 other people, grab that Dragon, even early on in the game, even in the game when they were losing, whereas previously we did not normally see that from them. So that might be something we see coming forward from them. The other really great thing we saw in the tournament, well, we saw a lot of great counter jungling from TSM, like really just imposing their will on people. It was really impressive. The Odd One did a great job in a couple of games. In a couple of games, he got caught in the jungle. But certainly, a lot of people are like, oh, well, they're taking this from the Moscow 5 book, which is true. And a lot of people are like, oh no, well, Hotshot's been invading their jungle, which he did in other games. As Nidalee, as Olaf, invaded the jungle, took buffs. And of course, Hotshot has been doing that, ever since I started watching him years and years ago. Well, maybe a year ago. But what the teams have gotten a lot better at is not just counter jungling and not just the idea of counter jungling, but TSM and Reginald, for example, really showed a lot of, forethought in that, whenever they had plans of the Odd One going into the enemy jungle, Reginald would push up his lane and make it so he could actually get to the fight quicker than the other opposing AP middle. Also, one game I think he picked up an early blue buff, his own blue buff, while Mundo got the red buff, and then Mundo just went straight into counter jungling. So Reginald on Galio had blue buff, also was able to zone out their AP middle from getting into the jungle. So it was a really safe counter jungling attempt. And really, the way to combat that is you really need a strong AP middle. And I think we saw 4 Gaming, or actually it wasn't 4 Gaming, it was actually against JPack and Friends in the semifinals, where, the first game that JPack and Friends just got dominated, just absolutely decimated by this strategy. In the second game, they picked a little bit of a stronger AP middle. They made sure that, their top was going to come down earlier, and they actually picked up a few kills on the Odd One, made it a really close game. Early on, TSM did come back and win it in the end, regardless, though. So, I mean, you have to have, it's a full team effort, and I think that's what we learned more than anything from Moscow 5, is when you're counter jungling, you need everyone, paying attention to that, I suppose, is the point. Of course, we ran some community games yesterday, so Corvus had some internet connection problems. Unfortunate, but, the games are just for fun, and all games are just for fun. So we did see that change. Now, the other thing that I wanted to call into attention is kind of the roaming middle meta. You're like, oh, what do you mean roaming middle meta? People have been roaming from middle forever. Well, CLG really took it to the next level in their games during this tournament. But what they would do is they would have St. Vicious, who was playing on Shyvana or Udyr, or, one of those very fast clears and really sturdy people. start taking over middle. And now if you're an Udyr or a Shyvana, you have decent ganks, but they're not really as strong as, it's not as strong as a Warwick at 6 or a Skarn or so on and so forth. But what they had them do was, St. Bishops would go middle and just keep on farming, and he actually had, super high CS in a lot of the games. But then they would have Big Fat LP, who in the game I'm thinking of was running Ahri, and they would have Ahri go gank. And this worked, basically, to perfection almost every time. He would go gank, and of course Ahri has, a triple dash in the form of Spirit Rush, and has Charm, which is a ridiculously good CC. And I don't know if he actually was rushing Rylai's, but he did pick up Rylai's at some point. I think he actually rushed Abyssal Scepter in the game I'm thinking of. But regardless, was able to, put out a lot of CC, catch up to people. He would gank like from behind the lane and just jump forward with Spirit Rush, and really just wreaked havoc. Whereas, it's easy to ward against an Udyr and a Shyvana. I mean, it's not like, oh, it's super easy to, stay against their ganks or to protect against their ganks, but it is easy in the sense that, if your bottom lane, your sport is only warding, like that's their one and, true goal in the game is warding and protecting the AD carry, unless that jungler gets an early oracles, which they often do, and even when they do, I guess, the point is, like, if they get the oracles, yeah, they clear out a ward, but the other team still knows they're coming, so they just back out, wait until they can put another ward down, hopefully wait until the jungler has lost interest in them. But when you have Ahri, who can really gank from behind the lane a lot better than an Udyr or a Shyvana, then you may as well use that to your advantage. Let that bruiser jungler, who does benefit a lot from items, just keep on farming middle, be really safe. They're probably not going to die to the opposing AP middle, and let your AP middle roam around. One thing to make this successful, of course, is you have to have your AP middle stay out of sight a lot of the time, whether this is by going back or just hiding in the fog of war. You don't want them to know that every time the AP middle is missing that they're coming bottom. But on the same token, that AP middle does need to farm. But I think it's just like at a certain point, Big Fat LP was like always hiding behind the little barrier there in middle. Would go out and farm, just farm the whole wave and then go back and hide a little bit. So I believe, Fornot was like, oh, okay, well, they're not around anymore. That's kind of the impression I got. They're just hiding in their jungle. They're probably taking their own race. They're probably doing this or that. But they're not actually a threat. And then Ahri would come out and get a double kill bottom lane, essentially. So I think that works. And we saw that actually with Kassadin and with Ahri. And that is just a great strategy. Like, you're giving up that middle lane farm, but, have a jungler who's going to clear waves fast. You can clear the wave, then pick up wolves and rays, come back and clear the next wave in middle. So you're not giving up farm when you have ganks, and the ganks are superior to the ganks that your jungler would run. And of course, that AP middle is going to be very, very strong, have a couple levels on bottom lane. So it just makes a lot of sense, this whole roaming middle thing, which of course we've seen a lot with Sion, but my favorite to do it is probably Ahri and Kassadin. Kassadin, of course, so much mobility. Ahri has a lot of mobility with the use of her ultimate to really catch up to opponents and kill them. So those are... What did I just see? Saw someone have a really weird topic on there. So those are kind of my thoughts from the GG Classic. I think we'll see CLG being more serious about Dragon, more serious about objectives. And of course, they've always been a great team fighting team. And I think they're, going to be better because of the competition that they've received from like Moscow 5, from TSM getting a little bit better, I feel, and just the whole scene evolving. Of course, CLG has been able to go through the scene and, be at top level through a number of different metas and, through the game evolving, for the past year and a half. But I think like now is a point where players are just getting a lot better in general, just because there's more players out there. It's bigger in Asia now, and in part because a lot of people are taking it more seriously, because now LoL esports is like a serious thing. We're getting 270,000 viewers almost in IEM Hanover. The GG Classic pulled in 35,000 just for a semifinal. So certainly there are a lot of people that are willing to watch these games, that really want to watch. And of course, those are just like live viewers. At the same time, there's a lot of people that tune in afterwards, are like, oh, what's happening? Really want to hear what happened. So we got like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people really keeping up with League of Legends as an esport. And that is great news for players and for spectators, because it means the game is just going to get better and better over time. All right. So with all of that, I'm going to get in some ranked games here. I'm going to cut that because that's my little blurb for the morning. Oh, that's not the correct button.